Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Smoko Podcast. My name is Alexis Armstrong, your host. The Smoko Podcast is the place to celebrate and highlight women, trans women, and non binary folk working within STEM and trade occupations. So please tune in, take a break, join us. We're on Smoko. Today, we're extremely lucky to be joined by the lovely Stephanie Hogewoning, who is an academic chair at the School of Transportation for SAIT, the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. She's come full circle that she was a alumni of their diploma program in avionics technology, and then she's returned as an instructor and now an academic chair in the School of Transportation. Her specialty is repairing and maintaining the electrical system. So this is communication, navigation, data systems for all things airplanes and avionics. It's absolutely incredible. So I can't wait to talk about avionics. She has an extensive history of working within the industry as well, where she's worked as an installation technician, and she was lucky enough to go down to Antarctica, and we're lucky enough to talk with her today about Antarctica and about her experience there. Stephanie, it is an honor to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really exciting for me to be here as well. I love the name of your podcast, by the way, Smoko. That's awesome.
Thank you. We called all of our breaks Smokos, and they just became like an institution, really.
When I was down in the Antarctic, I was down there with the British Antarctic Survey, and they called their breaks Smoko. It connected with me for sure.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I don't know who coined it first, if it was the Brits or the Aussies, but they definitely did a very good job of naming their breaks. And Stephanie, to get us started, I was wondering if you could explain or talk about how you discovered aviation, because I just think it's so cool that this is what you ended up pursuing and this is your specialty.
Yeah, of course. It's a family business, aviation. So my grandfather was a pilot. He actually trained in the Air Force. He flew Lancasters, did not fly them in active combat, but he did fly the Lancaster. And my father followed in his footsteps and was a pilot. So he was a pilot I started out actually being a water bomber. That's where he got his hours, learned to fly larger aircraft, moved up to doing a small charter with a company called Time Air that anyone in Southern Alberta would probably be familiar with. They were really big out of Lethbridge and Medicine Hat. And then he was lucky enough to be in one of the final hiring sprees that Air Canada had in the 80s. In the 80s, it was pretty hard to get a job in aviation. It was a very competitive industry. He was super lucky to end up getting a spot with Air Canada. His options were he was going to go Air Canada or he was going to go to the military. So luckily, he didn't end up in the military because that probably would have changed my life considerably.
Yes, yes, it would have.
Yeah. But then, interestingly enough, when my father worked for Time Air, my mom was raised in Medicine Hat, and she actually was a part of the cabin crew for Time Air. Uh,
Okay.
yeah, back in that day, they called her a stewardess. Nowadays, more politically correct term, I think, would be the flight attendant or
Yeah.
the back cabin crew. That's where they met. Was in Time Air flying airplanes.
That's really
Um,
cool.
so it's super sweet. So aviation was in my family. Nothing that I had ever really thought of when I was younger. I was always fascinated with airplanes. Funny enough, to me, the smell of the jetway, so like the bridge out to the airplane, where you can smell that airplane smell, the jet fuel, the cold air. And then there's always a mixture of cologne because of people going on the
Yeah.
airplanes and everything like that. That smell to this day instantaneously just reminds me of my dad because when my dad would come
Oh.
home from flying, that's what he would smell like. He would smell like the jetway of it. An airplane, just his suit is from being out on the ramp and checking the airplane and stuff like that. So his flight suit would smell like that. So always loved that. I always loved aviation. Never really had thought as a small child that I was going to be, I never had aspirations to become a pilot. I was never like, I want to do this. I want to be a pilot, just like my dad. I was just always fascinated by it. But then as I started to age and started to look at what am I going to do when I get out of high school, I had struggled in my last few years in high school. My parents had moved me to a new high school that I was completely unknown to me. So had a hard time which affected obviously my performance within school. So I wasn't really in a position where I had probably the best marks to be entering into university or something like that. The trade school was a viable option for me. And I had thought as well about potentially becoming a pilot. My dad had explained to me that I would be very good at it. I would probably end up advancing very far within the career because of the fact that I would be good and that I was a woman. So recognizably, it's a very obviously male-dominated industry, and any women that show promise, they try and obviously get them into the industry, especially in large carriers like Air Canada, WestJet, that sort of stuff. They want female pilots for diversity within the workforce, obviously. So he had explained that, and he said, but you're going to start your career out making nothing, living up north,
Yep.
probably being a rampy in the freezing cold, sleeping in the back of a hangar on a cot. He's like, it'll be hard, but you'll go far. Or you can go into the maintenance side and you will also go far, but it'll be more reliable from off the bat, because my dad knew that side of the industry. He actually had started out his career as a mechanic,
Oh, okay.
in
Very
order
cool.
to just get his foot in the door to
Yeah.
get someone to let him fly airplanes, essentially. And funny enough, my dad had just come back from a trip where he had been in Toronto and they needed to have their FMS, which is their flight management system, updated. So that's typically an avionics job. So they
Okay.
called and they said their flight management system required an update. So while they were doing just switch over of passengers, an avionics technician came out, and it was a young lady, maybe a few years older than me. So he
Yeah.
started talking to her and asking her about her job and what she did and how she liked it. So he came back and he said, you know what? I think you should probably look into avionics, probably more up your alley. And he said to me, like, you're also small, so they'll probably stick you in a lot of like fuel tanks and
Yeah.
stuff like that if you go into maintenance.
Fine
Yeah.
spaces will be your new best friend. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. It'll be a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier on your body, a little bit more like you're inside the airplane more and stuff like that. My dad was a huge influence to me. He was obviously a very important person in my life, and I had huge respect. And I think obviously wanted to make my dad proud.
Yeah.
So that really drove me, as I was like, yeah, then I think I will. And so I came into the program, into avionics, and I loved it. SAIT really was a turning point in my life. Like I mentioned, I wasn't on necessarily the best path. And I came to SAIT and it changed everything for me. I forever have a huge love for the Institute.
That's such a cool story. Thank you for sharing it. It's so beautiful in so many ways. I love that SAIT and the program was such a big turning point in your life. I know my sister is currently at SAIT and it's for her the same thing. Like it's changed her life from now on and
Yeah.
she loves the program so much. So I love that you had the same experience. But I also love how serendipitous kind of the your story was in a way that it happened to be a young woman in avionics that your dad could be
Mhm.
like, yep, this is like my daughter. My daughter is basically this woman or very similar, have similar
Yeah.
passions and goals. And that kind of conversation, that one maintenance, like took you to avionics. I also love that it was passed down and it was from a family of pilots. It's very cool to have that mentor with your dad and to be able to talk to him and have someone in the industry and give you good counsel about how the industry works. And maybe from my understanding, is there two kind of branches when you're looking at taking care and maintaining a plane? Is there avionics and then mechanical? Is one kind of more engineering and mechanic based, and then one's more comm and technology based? Is that kind of the difference between them?
There's actually three different streams. You're very right. So avionics is essentially computer systems, electronics, navigation, communication within the airplane. So essentially
Wow,
you're an
it's a
aircraft
lot.
electrician as well as like the systems maintenance. And avionics actually can take two different streams as well, where you can do on aircraft maintenance or you can do on the bench, which is taking the broken component out of the airplane, fixing it on the bench, and then bringing it back. Or you're the person on the airplane that's actually fixing the airplane side of the system. So there's two different streams there. Maintenance, yes, it's more they're like, you think engines, like engines, fluids, so your hydraulics.
Nuts
Yeah.
and bolts of
Yeah.
the plane. Okay.
And more with the way that aircraft are advancing and becoming more and more electric, you're seeing more of a blur between those two as to what is a maintenance job and what is an avionics person's job. So that's been a really interesting development within the industry. And then the third trade that we have within our industry is structures, which
Okay.
is like the actual structure of the aircraft. So like a bird strike that smashes the front of the wing in, that's a structures person that comes out and fixes that, or corrosion and need to replace parts of the aircraft because of that, or modifications to an airframe, anything to do with the structural part of the aircraft is a structures technician that does that. they tend to be more the artistic ones within.
Designer. Very cool. There's kind of three three systems of it. And I could see, I think I do have a question later about the future of the industry, but I could see that kind of blur because technology and
Mhm,
data is becoming the most BL end all thing in almost every single
mhm.
industry. So I could see that blur. When it came to SAIT and with your program that it was this life-changing beautiful moment and set you up for the rest of your life. I was wondering if you could speak to how it felt returning as an educator and having this full circle moment of being an alumni of the Avionics Technology Diploma Program and then returning as an instructor and now as an academic chair of the School of Transportation. How was that experience? Has it been surreal coming back as an educator?
So it was actually terrifying, to take that leap to move out of industry into standing in front of a class of 32 people and thinking, "Wow, now, I'm supposed to be the sage on the stage that knows everything, and I don't feel like I do." That quickly went away, and it was very cool to be able to reach so many people and be able to share the stories and things that I had done and share the things that I'd learned within the industry. I adored being an instructor. It was fantastic job just getting to interact with the students, getting to teach. I loved the courses that I taught. I taught a lot of the basic electronics, the Ohm's law,
The good stuff. Yeah.
and then I did all the installation. I did a lot of heavy maintenance when I was in the industry, so a lot of like rebuilds of aircraft. So I did a lot of like install
Cool.
work. So I became the install instructor
Amazing.
and absolutely loved it. Coming to work at SAIT every day, it is honestly probably one of the best facilities. Within the aviation programs, we have probably the best team that I have ever worked on. Just an amazing group of people working here. And I was incredibly fortunate that when I came into this role, I came into the role under a very strong female leader. So a fantastic mentor to be able to build the foundation of how to be an instructor on. She left and moved on to a different school within SAIT. And I got another incredibly strong female leader, Linda Holden. It was incredibly wonderful being able to watch both of them rise within the institution because they both came from an instructor position and rose within the institution and to obviously receive their mentorship and just learn from them. That was wonderful. It was a really exciting thing to be able to be part of that process of growing the next generation of technicians. So then the next step for me was to move to obviously the chair role. It had always been my goal. As a personality type, it's funny, I've done a lot of personality
Yes. Quizzes is probably all
assessments
of that.
in the instructor role and in the leadership role. I did a skills assessment where they assess your base of skills. What are your strong things? What do you always lean to? And my two top skills was achiever and discipline. I actually did it in a leadership academy. And when I had it out, the facilitator for the leadership academy walked by and he was like, "Wow, that is very rare that you see
Yeah.
achiever and discipline as the top two. You must be a dog with a bone." And I was like, "Oh, yes."
This is exactly what I was like made to do. This was like for me. That's perfect.
So I've always had that just I want to try something new. I want to try something more. I want to grow. So when the opportunity to become the chair came up, I was very excited to obviously put my name in for that. And I was fortunate enough to get the role, and it was very dynamic. I took the role in 2019, and then 3 months later, COVID hit.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness. Oh no, I
so
didn't put the math together. That's a time to start the new gig and the new role. That's insane.
So it was a huge learning curve because I was trying to just learn the position as well as navigate all of the complexities that COVID threw into it. But it was fantastic because I think I learned more than I would have otherwise. It was very stressful and very hard. And there were days where I was like, I think I've made a terrible choice.
Oh.
I should have stayed as an instructor, but I knew that it was where I wanted to be. I wanted to be in a position where I could use my skills to bring the program forward and have a wider influence on what it is that we do here at SAIT and what we're doing for the aviation community and be able to really drive our programs into the next stage
Generation
of
of
where
it.
we need to be.
I feel like you probably did get just thrown into the pressure cooker with COVID and I think it's an understatement to say, oh, I learned so much more than I think I would have otherwise. I think you probably learned like 20 years of being an academic chair probably in a couple months because it was just so stressful for everybody. And I couldn't imagine changing regulations, changing kind of government policies, being in education with students. And are we open? What's going to go on with virtual learning? Especially when SAIT is so hands on, your programs are so in person and hands on. I could just see that being very hard.
And we have the added challenge in the aviation portfolio is we're externally regulated by Transport Canada. So we're an
Oh my
approved
goodness.
ATO here at SAIT, which means that not only do I answer to SAIT, but I answer to the higher power of Transport Canada as well. And Transport Canada does not recognize online learning as a viable learning. They backed off a bit
Yeah.
for our theoretical courses. But in order for us to maintain accreditation, we needed to deliver every single hour of our practical hands-on, in a hands-on environment. We had no ability to reduce hours.
Oh my God.
So that was, that was insane because the second that we got back, that we were permitted to come back on campus, we jumped back in. It was July 13th. It was actually my birthday that they
Happy birthday
opened
to you.
that they opened the campus back up, and I had full hands on deck, and we were on campus since July of 2020, and we had been on campus. And then as things started to open up, they started to talk about bringing some other schools back on campus. They're developing all these programs to like integrate instructors back onto campus, and my instructors were all like, we just came back, there was no program for us. And I'm like, no, there wasn't. We
You're the
just
guinea
jumped right
pigs.
in.
You're the first ones that had to come back. I didn't realize that you guys had to go by the rules and regulations of Transport Canada. It does make complete sense. That's there. I just had no idea that was part of the program. Another layer of complexity and another layer of complexity within your first year of academic chair. Very, very wild. I did love your story about the full circle moment. If I could speak to it, is how important it is for female mentorship and to have those representation of like strong female leaders and female mentors that kind of help you within the industry. And I think that's so beautiful. And such a wonderful thing about SAIT is the amount of female leadership. And maybe we've touched on these already, but maybe if people are unaware about SAIT and unaware about the avionics program in the School of Transportation, could you touch on what you guys teach? And maybe that's going to be too broad of a question because you guys teach everything. But in the avionics, what do you get out of the degree? What do you get out of that diploma program?
So the lovely part about our programs is because, like I mentioned, we are Transport Canada accredited. So for the generalized public's knowledge, you don't actually need a license to work on an airplane, which might
Whoa,
make some people
shocking.
go,
Yeah.
oh my God.
It's complete.
You do not need a license to work on an airplane. You do
Wow.
need a license to sign out an airplane. So to certify it as airworthy, you need to be a licensed individual.
Mm.
To obtain a license within the industry, there's two different methods that you can go about doing that. You can either just hopefully someone will hire you sight unseen, no skills into the industry and allow you to work.
I don't know if I love
Um,
that, but okay.
yeah, you can work for 48 months. You can go to Transport Canada, write all of Transport Canada's exams, which are very large, comprehensive exams covering all of the competencies that they determine need to be understood in order to be an engineer for an aircraft. And then you can have appropriate work experience, have a filled out logbook, write all these exams, and within 48 months, you can then get your Transport Canada license. That's a long shot because probably not a lot of companies are going to hire someone with
No.
skills or experience in the field.
It's like trying to pass the bar without going to law school. Like it is
Yeah.
possible, but it's difficult. Very, very difficult.
Exactly. It would be a huge challenge and a huge undertaking. So the benefit that SAIT has is we have an approved curriculum. That's why we're an ATO. So we're an approved training organization, which means that we have structured our programs in such a way that Transport Canada has come in and looked at the curriculum that we deliver, and they've said, yes, this meets with what we expect an engineer should know. So they have certified us. All of our examinations are certified. So the benefit of coming to SAIT is you come to SAIT, you progress through your program. With avionics, that's 2 years. Aircraft maintenance, that's 2 years. And structures, that's 1. Then what you get at the end of that, I issue a letter of accreditation. What that gives them is it exempts them from writing all of the Transport Canada examinations except for the CARS, which is the Canadian Aircraft Regulations exam. And it credits for aircraft maintenance and avionics 18 months of work experience
Oh,
towards
amazing.
a license. And for structures, it credits 10.
Fantastic.
When you get out into the industry, now you have this basis of knowledge. There's a way higher likelihood that you're going to get hired. You can then get a job. So that is the benefit of coming to SAIT, and that's what we do at SAIT, is we
Amazing.
provide an approved curriculum that will get you essentially a leg up in the industry.
And you have an instant kind of streamline into the industry and also have this big base of technical and theoretical knowledge, but also hands-on
Mhm.
experience, which is so
Yeah.
lovely about the program. It's very cool that you have this program in place. And maybe speaking to your role as an academic chair, and maybe we've already talked about it a little bit of your favorite part, or definitely what was a challenge when you first started with COVID. But what is your favorite part of your job right now about this position? And then maybe what's something that you discovered along the way that you didn't think of when you first started your role and you transitioned from instructor to academic chair?
I think my favorite part of the job is getting to see the big picture. I actually like getting to stand back, getting to see the big picture, getting to know all of the programs. And actually, I like the regulatory side of it as well. Being the PRT, the person responsible for training and understanding the regulatory side of it, that has been a really exciting part for me to learn more of that. Something that I didn't think I realized is how being the academic chair, because we're at a satellite facility, which means we're not at the main campus. We're actually out at the airport. We literally train right off the end of the airfield, and we can see WestJet, we can see Calgary International Airport from our facility. But that provides a huge disconnect as you don't get a lot of the culture of SAIT. We have our own sort of independent culture out here. So I think one of the things that was exciting for me about becoming the chair is it gave me an opportunity to enmesh myself more within the culture of SAIT
Right.
versus just our own independent culture that we have out at Aero, and to see the difference. And I think it really made me realize the culture out at the Aero Center. I think some of the very special things about the Aero Center and about the culture that we have out here by also seeing what the culture is at the main campus and main site.
I didn't realize that you guys are a satellite campus and right
Mhm.
on the airport. I worked on a satellite community from College Station, Texas, which is where we were based, but I was on a boat and I never saw Texas. To this day, I have never been to the state of Texas, even though I was an employee for more than 5 years. And the boat or like any satellite, it does become its own kind of world and it has its own quirks. And it's nice to
Mhm.
go back and to meet people from the other side that you're like, oh, yeah, we're actually all together and from the same
Yeah.
institution. Stephanie, thank you so much for talking about SAIT and talking about the program and talking about your education and your work as an academic chair and an instructor. I just think it's so cool. But it's only kind of one aspect of your story because I know that you've also worked for years in the industry and
Mhm.
worked in the field of aviation, working for both the Western Avionics and then Rocky Mountain Aircraft. And like you were saying before, it was all like installation specific. You became the girl for installation. And I was wondering if you could describe what that meant and what that means. What are the roles and responsibilities that are tied to that?
So I worked in more heavy maintenance as an install technician. So Rocky Mountain Aircraft, they're a heavy maintenance facility. They don't operate their own aircraft. They just
Okay.
maintain aircraft, either their own aircraft that they then lease out, or they maintain aircraft for other companies. And their specialty is the Twin Otter. Twin Otter is a very unique airplane. I love it. It's a funny little airplane.
What is the Twin Otter? If I have the right one in my mind, is it the one with the two dual props that are like float planes almost?
They can be put on floats. Yeah, they are a workhorse. They're like the 67 Chevy of the airplane world. It's like they run no matter what.
I've been
Yeah,
on so many of them with
yeah,
Mining, I think. They're like the
yeah.
main one that gets you to camp.
uh,
Oh, yeah. Okay. I know what you're talking about.
You can put them on tundra tires and land them on gravel. You can put them on skis and land them on snow. You can put them on floats and land them on water. They take a massive payload for the size of aircraft that they are. You can load them up to 14,500 pounds, which is a lot of weight
Yeah,
for an
that's a
airplane
lot.
of its size. And they are a STOL aircraft. So de Havilland's sort of claim to fame was manufacturing STOL aircraft, and STOL stands for short takeoff and landing. So the Twin Otter, you can search it. Anyone that's interested, go ahead and look at some of the crazy videos on YouTube of how short of a distance they need to take off and to land. And that is all due to the design of the airplane, mostly the fact that they have these gigantic, long, thick wings with giant flaps. So they have a massive wing area versus the size of the aircraft, but they're incredibly slow. You're not getting anywhere fast in a Twin Otter, but you can bring an awful lot of stuff with you and go anywhere that you want. If a Twin Otter can't get you in there, the only other option is a helicopter at that point in time. Because if a Twin Otter can't land there, probably nothing else can. So super unique, interesting airplane, very much a workhorse of the North. If you did a lot of work up north in mining, you definitely, I would hedge my bets, you've probably flown on at least one or two Twin
Oh,
Otters in your life.
I think all I've flown on is Twin Otters. Like, as
Yeah.
you were describing it, I was like, "Yep, that checks my need. Yep,
Yeah.
100%."
They're noisy,
Oh,
bouncy, slow.
workhorse. I think that's
Mhm,
perfect description of them. It felt like
mhm.
stepping back into the 60s. I thought someone was about to start smoking the first time I went, I think, in a Twin Otter.
And that probably wouldn't be unheard of, especially with some of the crusty people that they get to fly these things around. I've flown with some pretty unique characters and worked with some pretty unique characters working with this airplane. But Rocky Mountains thing was maintaining and mostly doing, they owned a fleet that they leased or an awful lot of heavy maintenance because Twin Otters, due to the nature of what they do and where they go, they crash an awful lot. And so they need to be rebuilt when they crash. And they're also a incredibly valuable airplane. But until de Havilland started manufacturing the 400 series just a few years ago, they were in high demand because there were only so many of them made. And so if you could find a fuselage, and a lot of them were things where, like we had aircraft that had been recovered from the jungles in Africa, and they knew that these things were out there. And literally someone trekked into the jungle and made the effort of pulling this thing out of the jungle because that's how valuable they were.
It's absolutely crazy that's the length to go, but I guess if they're so limited and they're a workhorse.
So essentially, in a rebuild, a lot of times what we would do is we'd have projects. We usually called them our hangar queens. It was something that had been pulled out of a jungle or a desert or somewhere or crashed, or that we at Rocky that they would piece back together and repair because that was their specialty. They're the specialist in heavy overhaul of Twin Otters. Quite often, the thing would get new wings. There's companies that'll build wings for them, but as long as you have the fuselage, you can essentially build a new Twin Otter out of it. And they would go through, strip it all down, take everything out, start repairing all of the skins. And by everything, I mean everything, all the wires, all the
Wow.
lines, because if something's been sitting in the
Yeah.
jungle for years, nothing inside of it is good anymore. So we'd tear them down to the bare structures, would start to work to rebuild them, and then it would be our job to go in. So at Rocky, we could rebuild the harnesses for them. So we had the ability to build a whole new wire harness and rewire the aircraft in its entirety. So from absolutely nothing, put a whole brand new wire harness in it and completely rewire the whole aircraft and also install a whole new avionics package, new instrumentation, communication,
That's
navigation
crazy.
equipment.
Yeah.
It would start with nothing and we would rebuild it to being a flying aircraft that then would be either sold to somebody or on lease. So that's where my sort of wheelhouse started, was in heavy maintenance. And then I moved to Western Avionics after working at Rocky, and I moved into the installation shop over there. So doing installs on various other kinds of aircraft, but this time mostly focused on just avionics. So not rebuilds of the full aircraft, just the avionics suites.
Rocky Mountain, it just sounds so unique. It sounds very
Mhm.
different. It sounds like every single day was something new, especially if they're coming from all over the world and all over like conditions because they're so valuable. Very different than a true avionics or what you'd be used to of just avionics. And I'm sure you probably have a favorite plane and a favorite rebuild that you had of being like, this one came in completely destroyed and we sent it out. It sounds like there was no typical day. It sounds like everything was all over the place. What was a good day for you when you worked in industry, and what was a bad day?
I think a good day is when things are going well. Things are going well, the project's chugging along, you're able to source the parts, you're on time, things are getting built. When progress is made in a sensible order and things are working along the way that they should. Bad days for me was always when things would come up that usually at bequest of a customer or because something else came up that was unbeknown to the company that needed to happen, where you're undoing work you've already done.
Oh, that's the worst.
That was always very frustrating, ones where I'd done a significant amount of work and then we'd get notification that either we needed to change something because a customer wanted something changed, or the customer had changed. They want something different now with this airplane. And so now you're redoing a lot of stuff. at times the stress of when something wasn't working properly, and then everyone's there breathing down your neck being like, when is it going to get
Yes.
fixed? And when you don't have the answer, when you're I don't know. I don't know. I
Yeah.
don't know what's wrong. I don't know why this thing won't work.
Give me time. I need time to figure it out.
And with aviation, it's time and money is always of the essence in aviation, just because the amount of money that you're looking at spending, time becomes a real big issue. Time is always very critical as to we need to get this done and get it out. I would have never loved line maintenance where that's an airplane comes in and you need to fix it and turn it around. I was not a fan of that kind of pressure.
I agree with that being a bad day. When I worked as a marine technician, a lot of our job on this like deep sea drilling vessel was creating specialized equipment. But because it was specialized and one on one, sometimes it would break, obviously. And we're just in the middle of the ocean. We have only the resources that we have, and we had to fix it. And then you
Yeah.
have the same situation of people being like, when is it done? And you're like, I don't know, man. Like we're doing our best. We have
Yeah.
like limited resources. I understand that it's costing time and money because it's a 24/7 drilling operation, but right now it's just like time, some peace of quiet. I don't think I
Yeah.
have the personality for it as well for line maintenance. I think that pressure definitely gets to me. And I think sometimes I've been a little bit sassy with customers of being like, you need to please go for a walk and I'll fix this if I can.
Yeah.
It is a pressure, so I could see that being very stressful. One really cool thing that I would love to speak about is your time working down in Antarctica. And my understanding is you were working for the British Antarctic Survey and you were
Yes.
there doing maintenance of their plane. You could describe the experience of working in Antarctica. I have only been on the coast of Antarctica. I still count it, but I've never been on the continent. How was that experience? And then how was that project? Was it different from an avionics perspective? Was it completely a different world?
So that was my experience with line maintenance, was working in
Okay.
Antarctica.
Okay.
That's what I did down there. Is I was their avionics support for the base. So the British Antarctic Survey operates 4 Twin Otters and 1-7 is their fleet of aircraft, and they have a base that the aircraft operate out of is Rothera Research
Mm.
Station, which is right on the peninsula of Antarctica. It's that little piece that like sticks
Yes.
out halfway, kind of halfway down the peninsula is where Rothera is located on an island. The first time that I got to Antarctica and I stepped off the airplane, Antarctica has a wild, breathtaking beauty to it that you would never be able to understand until you went there. I tell everybody, if you ever have the chance to go there and actually go to the continent, do it. There's something about just the quiet and the mystery and the very raw, terrifying beauty of Antarctica
Yeah, it's
because so
very
untouched. It's very unique. And where Rothera is, it's a gorgeous location because it's on the peninsula. So it is on a mountain range and it's right off the sea. So you
gorgeous.
have the sea there. So tons of animals, tons of wildlife. And obviously they have a hangar and a runway, which is very cool. It's pretty unique to get a hangar down in
Yeah.
Antarctica. So that's pretty neat. Unheated. It's a hangar. It's
It's
still a
just
building.
something. It's a structure in
Yeah.
Antarctica, which is very hard to find.
And the Rother Research Station was set up very nicely. The buildings and stuff there were all very nice. So I was based out of there for 6 months, maintaining the aircraft. It was an absolutely wonderful experience, one where I had a ton of growth. I learned a lot about myself because I was young. I was only 23 years old when I went down there, and I was responsible for the whole fleet of aircraft. And pretty much anybody that came through Antarctica, because Kemborg Air operates through there, and there's a couple other operators that operate heavily in Antarctica. And anyone that would come through, if they had avionics problems, they usually would ask me because I was the only avionics person, I believe, on the whole continent.
Honestly, that checks. Yeah.
Yeah. It was a huge amount of responsibility. The first time I'd ever been very far away from home, been very far away from everything that I knew. And that was very outside of my personality to do something like that. Tend to be a play it safe type of person. And it was a huge risk that I took to just jump in both feet and say, yeah, I'll go and I'll do this for 6 months. So it was super interesting to get to work on the airplanes. I met some really great people. Actually, funny enough, one of the instructors that currently works with me here at SAIT was actually one of the individuals that I went down to Antarctica with. So it was, yeah, just a fantastic experience. And then getting to live with essentially the British was really interesting as well because it was living with a different culture. Just getting to learn the things that they do
Yeah.
and things about their culture and the different, like they always had smoko
Smokos.
being one of the things. All of the breaks were smoko. Every Sunday they had a fancy dinner and then they'd have fancy dress parties, which to us You think you dress up in nice clothes, no fancy dresses, you dress up in costumes.
So much fun.
And met a lot of really fascinating people with really fascinating stories down there. I could talk for hours about the people that I met.
See, I might have you back on the show just to do that.
Yeah, and I definitely would love to. I flew with one pilot that I could tell stories that you would think this cannot be true, and I will let you know 100% they are. He was the biggest character. And it was funny when you mentioned about the jumping on the Twin Otter and thinking someone was gonna light up a smoke. So this pilot did smoke on the Twin Otter, and I have to tell this one because it is hilarious. We get on the Twin Otter and we're flying, and we hit some weather. And so the weather, it rocks the Twin Otter. Everything that we have inside just goes flying. Like our garbage that we had in there exploded. All the manuals that we were carrying, we were ferrying this aircraft. Just everything exploded, went everywhere. And he always kept his smokes in his flight suit pocket. It was hard enough we hit this weather hard enough that his smokes went flying out of his pocket. And the first thing he gains control of the airplane, and the first thing he goes, find my smokes. I was like, can we just concentrate on getting out of the weather? Like, I will get you your smokes.
Yeah. Do you not know what just happened to us? Like, we just got
Yeah.
rocked, man. It's so funny because, like, even that little story, they remind me of sailors. And I feel like that's the experience of it. Like, I feel like every
Yeah.
single guy that I've ever worked on a boat with has been the same kind of weird, crazy cast of characters. I don't know if it's
Yeah.
the isolation. I don't know if it's just like that's what draws them there, but
Yeah.
are just this like funny cast of characters. And that's so funny that he was smoking on a Twin Otter because in a weird way I feel like that plane is made to smoke on because it's just like when you walk on it, it does feel like the 1970s. I don't know how to
Yeah.
explain it. It has that energy to it, which is ridiculous. And so that's so funny. That was your experience down in Antarctica. What a leap of faith of you saying I had never done that. I had never pushed myself out of my comfort zone or gone away from home. I think you went the furthest away from home that's physically possible. Like it's
Yeah.
one of the most remote places in the entire world. So that's crazy that you took that leap. I'm so happy that you did because it sounds like such an amazing experience. But also the role, no wonder you had pressure in that job because like the role and responsibility of it, especially in Antarctica, it's such a dangerous environment and a dangerous
Mhm.
field survey that you do have to make sure that everything works perfectly and is maintained perfectly of limited resources, I'm sure, being so
Yeah.
isolated. That amount of pressure and responsibility at that age is insane at 23.
Mhm.
What helped you with that?
Honestly, it was just the drive it was a relationship that I'd built with definitely the pilots for sure. The pilots, you want to make sure that the aircraft are safe because these guys, you live with them every day. They matter to you and you know that they're flying into dangerous places. So you want the aircraft to be the best that they possibly can be. And I think it was just the excitement of getting to do something like that and the desire to want to be great at it, to show that I think always in my career, I pushed myself to be good and independent and uh, the top that I can be because reality is, as a woman in a male dominated career, I think you get painted with the brush immediately of that jaded look of, is she going to be able to do it?
There's
Oh, it's a
bias. There's
girl. Yes, bias. She's just a little girl. What's this girl going to do? My dad was a fierce supporter of me. I was never a princess. I was never his little princess. He was always like, you're smarter and you're better than that, so do better.
yeah.
So I carried that through obviously into throughout my life. I think it's part of that wanting to make him proud and parting to want to make myself proud too and show everybody that yeah, I can and don't doubt me for any other reason other than if I show you that I can.
Don't doubt me right away just because of like a
Yeah.
preconceived bias. I really resonate with that. And thank you for sharing. I love that was the advice because sometimes I think back of my career and I'm like, I feel like everything that I've accomplished in my life has been because of spite. Like sometimes
Yeah.
it's just like, like
Yeah.
people being like, no, you know what? You can't do that. You can't go into
Mm.
geology. You can't go into mining. This isn't for you. I feel like my entire motto could be like, and I took that personal.
Tell me I can't and I'll show you I can, right?
Exactly, like that stubbornness. My dad's like one of my biggest inspirations as your dad is to you. And I feel like he always had that as well of just being like, prove I'm wrong.
Mhm.
Of course you can do that. Keep going. I love that mentality. I really resonate with it. Maybe if we can get lofty, if I can ask you a couple lofty questions in the future of aviation, but what's exciting you right now about the future of the aviation industry? What does that look like?
I think one of the biggest things that excites me about the future of aviation is just the advancements that aviation is making. It is becoming so much more electrical, so much more technology and computer based, down to even like the engines and the mechanical components, the hydraulics, the brakes, the way that they're starting to build aircraft. They're diverting away from a lot of the traditional methods and using a lot more electrical and computer controls. That really opens up the industry to advance and to change. And it's not an industry of brute force. It's not an industry where you need to be big and strong. There are certain things that you do need that for. There is always going to be heavy components on airplanes. But I think that in the view of an industry that's really a great sort of STEM or non traditional industry for women to get into, aviation is fantastic for that simple fact that it isn't about brute force and ignorance. It's about finesse and it's about having those delicate hand skills. And I think too, generationally in the industry, we've lost a lot of kind of the old guard,
Mm.
and we're seeing a lot of younger people rising up within the industry. My husband works in the industry as well,
Okay.
actually.
Okay.
He's also one of my biggest supporters, and I think that helps huge to be a woman in a non-traditional industry and to rise up is to have people that rally behind you and support you. And he's always been of the viewpoint that like diversity on the hangar floor, especially more women on the hangar floor, is better for the industry. It helps to bring in different perspectives, different viewpoints, different method of doing things that's incredibly beneficial with the way that aviation is going. It's one of those careers that I wish more women would consider and would get into, because I think the more women we see in this industry, the more the industry is going to become a better place for women to work in.
Completely. I
And it's an industry desperate for a workforce, both maintenance and pilots. We're crying for people. We've lost so many people just due to retirements and due to COVID. So it's just huge prospects in this industry right at the moment.
I could see it being this like empty vacuum a little bit, especially since COVID. I feel like it was an industry that was rocked. So I could see it being the desperate for people and desperate for people to enter this field. The future of avionics and the future of aviation is that it is going to be a huge hub of innovation for technology. And because of that, it has this brilliant kind of opening that it can be perfect for increased diversity and increased women working within this field because it's moving. I do want to ask one more question if I can. And
Of
that what's something that brings you joy about working in aviation?
What I enjoyed about working in aviation is when you saw the product of your labor fly away. Just that moment of, I did that.
Yeah.
That was me. That airplane is flying because of not solely, obviously, the work that I did. There was a great team of people involved. I didn't build the airplane all on my own in any way, shape, or form. But then my hand was in it, and that airplane wouldn't be flying and it wouldn't be doing what it was doing if I hadn't been here and done what I did. That very visual satisfaction of your job, of what you have accomplished. I always loved that. Just seeing them go from being a fuselage in the back of the hangar with nothing in them to sitting out on the ramp, engines running, ready to
Ready to
taxi
go.
and take off and fly. That very concrete product of your labor was what I really enjoyed.
I feel like it aligns to your other answers though earlier in this interview when you spoke about big picture. I feel like that's a big picture thing and like you get to like actually
Mm.
physically see it and see the impact that you've created come to life. Brilliant answer. Thank you so much for coming onto the show, Stephanie. I feel like I learned so much. Thank you so much for coming onto the show. I really appreciated it. It was wonderful speaking with you.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Alexis. I really enjoyed this. It was a really fun experience for me as well to get to be on this. I'm so flattered and honored that you wanted to interview me.
It was an honor to have you on the show. I really appreciate it. And thank you guys if you're listening. Thank you so much for listening. This was the Smoko podcast with Stephanie. And thank you again for coming on the show. Bye, guys. We'll see you next
Bye.
week.